Hey everyone, it's the North Shore Drive podcast here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. It's Chris Carter here with Ray Fittipaldo. While Steelers OTAs have begun, the national media is singing loudly about Aaron Rodgers not being there. We'll talk about that from a local perspective as people who are at OTAs and what the players are saying in the sense that we get about how that's impacting the organization. Also, the offensive line's future finally looking set, and a look at the wide receivers post George Pickens now that we get to talk to the veterans coming back this year. All here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm Chris Carter. He's Ray Fittipaldo. We're your Steelers writers here. And as always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to the show to get all of your Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Did you know they also do workers' compensation? Be sure to call them today at 1-800-94-EDGAR to get them to fight for the rights that you deserve. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Ray, you wrote about this yesterday from the perspective of one of the local reporters that covers this team daily and talking about how Aaron Rodgers, not being at the Steelers, start of OTAs, if there's uncertainty. The players that we talked to didn't seem too phased. Even Mason Rudolph was kind of just like, hey, it is what it is. I'm here to work to do what we do. But if you ask the national media, it was not the same case. Terry Bradshaw, former Steelers legend quarterback, went on a radio show in Arkansas and called it a joke. He says it's a joke that he's not there. What are you going to do? Bring him in for a year? Are you kidding me? That guy needs to stay in California and go and eat bark. Saying a lot of things there. Joy Taylor, of course, sister of Hall of Famer Jason Taylor and native Pittsburgher, kind of let out against the Steelers. So even if you get Rodgers, he's only a one-year solution, and him not being she kind of went off on him not being at OTA, saying that's a disgrace to the Steelers and kind of unmakes them for who they have been historically. Right? I think we can agree that Aaron Rodgers not being at OTA certainly creates a bit more of a circus where we are all, as reporters, forced to ask, okay, what's the plan here? It does leave things in the air. But is it this disaster scenario that these national pundits are talking about?
No, I don't think so. I mean, short of the Steelers re-signing Justin Fields for the price they wanted, Chris, what's the better option, right? I mean,
yeah,
they were sort of in on Sam Darnold. I don't know that Sam Darnold would have been the answer either. But then they moved on to Aaron Rodgers, and they've been in this, 2.5 month, song and dance with him, where they can't get an answer, or they're waiting on an answer from Aaron, because of his personal situation. So I think the way Mike Tomlin and the Steelers are looking at it is, listen, they believe that they're a better football team if Aaron Rodgers is their quarterback, whether he's here on May 27th, June 27th, or July 24th, the first day they have to report to Latrobe. So that's the bottom line. I think the Steelers made that decision months ago. They're okay with it, even though maybe some people in the Steelers fan base or in the national media are not.
The Steelers chopped a week off their OTAs this year, whereas normally you get 3 weeks of OTAs and then you get your mandatory minicamp week. So essentially, cutting that a week short. Is it possible that maybe they just don't see OTAs as this thing that's absolutely necessary for everyone to show up at, especially considering guys like TJ Watt and even another new player on the team, DK Metcalf, and another one, Darius Slay, they weren't there on Tuesday. We're recording this before we go to Wednesday OTAs. Is it possible that just hey, it's just not seen as necessary of a thing as other people might see it?
Yeah, listen, I think the Steelers and other teams maybe are realizing that. And listen, Cam Hayward spoke to this yesterday. I mean, Cam Hayward missed, I think, half of the OTAs last spring when he was in that contract dispute, doing last year what TJ Watt is doing this year, staying away because he wants his contract settled. And what did it mean to Cam Hayward? Cam Hayward came out and had an all-pro season. So it was obvious that it didn't matter to him. And I think we should point out, Chris, that it's not unusual over the years for star players not to show up at these voluntary OTAs. Troy Polamalu went off and
Mhm.
did his own thing for years, trained with Marvin Marinovich, and
Mhm.
did his whole thing separate from the Steelers. Ben Roethlisberger golfed more in the spring than he did attend Steelers practices, for the bulk of his tenure as Steelers quarterback. I mean, I would say for a lot of those years, maybe not the later years because he was more of a leader with a young team, but last decade he was there for maybe half the OTAs. He'd maybe show up on Tuesday and then he wouldn't be there Wednesday or Thursday. So not really a big deal. I think it's going to be a big deal if any of these guys don't show up for mandatory minicamp. But even the hard, guys who want to take a hard stance, like TJ Watt, I don't think he's not going to show up for minicamp. I think he'll show up, he'll do his holding thing, whatever, won't participate, and that'll be the end of that.
And to your point about the impact of these things, when TJ Watt last did a holding, he showed up, but he didn't like work out with the team, quote unquote. He kind of did his own personal thing on the side. That led into the best season of his career that tied the Michael Strahan sack record when he had 2.5 sacks. So it's not like it's not like that's just something that takes away from what you're able to do. As long as you're there for training camp,
Yeah.
as long as you're there working with the team and in concert with what they're trying to do. And as long as the team understands where you are, I think that's the bottom line here. But the obvious disconnect here, I see, Ray, is that the Steelers have not put out this image that like, hey, we have an agreement with Aaron Rodgers. We understand when he's coming. They're openly saying, hey, you know, our rooting saying, hey, they're a little bit longer. Mike Tomlin saying he has until training camp. So there hasn't been this openness about that. There's some backdoor agreement, but this is the thing that I think could be the situation is that maybe there is one, and we won't know about it until Aaron Rodgers actually shows up or does it. Like where he says, "Hey, I am retiring or I'm signing with someone else." Which I think he's out of candidates. He personally ruled out the Saints as a team that he would even sign with. The Vikings basically being the last team on the table, and they got JJ McCarthy coming up this year. So
Right.
I'm not sure that why he would go there. So it could be a thing where in a couple months time we'll have seen that he's arrived at mandatory minicamp or arrives at training camp, and all of this stuff is forgotten, or it could be the thing that leads to disaster because Aaron Rodgers last year a quarterback, a 5-win team. The year before that towards Achilles. The year before that missed the playoffs with the Packers. So all those things factoring into just wondering, can he be the right fit for the Steelers? And granted, again, this is a temporary fit. As we've said all along, whereas like Terry Bradshaw and Joy Taylor are talking about, hey, we don't see the plan. We don't see the plan is not Aaron Rodgers for the long term. It's it's for him to be your one-term option. And maybe this is part of why they wouldn't go for a Sam Darnold, because Sam Darnold wanted a multi-year deal. He wanted to be somewhere where he was going to get a chance to be the guy for several years. The Steelers know they don't want that. They wanted someone to get them to next year so that in 2026 they can draft the quarterback of their future and they can base their plan off of that.
And it was only a month ago, but I feel like we have to mention, with Terry Bradshaw saying what he said, this is a joke. Listen, after Cam Ward, it was obvious. They weren't really in on Jackson Dart. Obviously, they weren't really in on Shedeur Sanders because they passed both those guys up. Dart went, I think, 4 picks later in the first round. We all know what happened to Shedeur Sanders. This quarterback class wasn't going to solve their problems this year, Chris.
Right.
Much in the same way that you just talked about the free agent class. There weren't a lot of great options. So the plan is, you're going to get a guy for 1 year, whether that's Mason Rudolph or Aaron Rodgers, and then you're going to try to go get your quarterback in the 2026 draft, which is shaping up as a really strong quarterbacks class. So this happens all the time. It's new for the Steelers because we're like year 4 into this post Roethlisberger retirement. But how many teams out there have been trying to find their franchise quarterbacks for 5 years, 10 years? I mean, look at the Cleveland Browns, right? I mean, they haven't solved that in decades. Maybe they thought they solved it with Deshaun Watson, but that never really panned out. And there are so many other teams across. Like look at what the Seahawks did after Russell Wilson. Geno Smith was good, but they didn't think he was $35-40 million good. Okay.
Right.
Or whatever number he ended up getting from the Raiders. So now they're trying Sam Darnold. They're kind of like in the same situation that the Steelers are. Maybe they're talking about this the same way on Seattle Talk Radio or Seattle Podcast. I don't know, but it's new for the Steelers, and I think that's why you're kind of getting this national criticism, because it's something that they haven't really gone through since Terry Bradshaw retired. Right? There was that phase way back when in the '80s where you had David Woodley, Mark Malone, Bubby Brister. Neil O'Donnell was a solution for a little while, but they didn't feel like they could win with him. They let him walk in free agency a month or two after he led that team to the Super Bowl. So until you find that franchise guy, it's going to be a storyline. And, I don't think it's anything out of the ordinary. I just think it's getting talked a lot about now just because the Steelers are the last team without a quarterback this offseason.
Right. And we'll see how that continues. Again, the plan is not for, I think that's the thing. The plan is not for this to be a thing that lasts forever, or to make Aaron Rodgers the long-term franchise quarterback. Plan is to get through this season and find that guy next year. And I think, oftentimes when we're captivated by the daily news cycle in sports, that's where they focus on the daily part of it. And there's the lack of the long-term view. And that's kind of what we have the advantage of not having a bird's eye view of the situation, of being in it here as we cover the Steelers at OTAs. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about something that's actually happening on the team. And that's the future of the offensive line looking a little bit more set, with the tackles being in the positions that we see them being in for the long term. That's Broderick Jones at left tackle, Troy Fautanu at right. We'll talk about that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast here for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. But first, want to remind you this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates, who also does workers' compensation. When you've been hurt on the job, who decides when you're better? Who decides when your treatment is over? And who decides when your benefits are over? The answer might surprise you. It's the insurance company's doctors. How does that make you feel? If the answer is not great, call Edgar Snyder Associates today at 1-800-94-EDGAR. They'll fight for the workers' compensation rights you deserve. Remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. We're back here in the North Shore Drive podcast. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's talk about the offensive line, because we didn't get to talk to these guys exclusively much on Tuesday, but we're going to try again on Wednesday. But Broderick Jones, a guy who's started at right tackle for 1.5 seasons now for the Steelers. They traded up to get him in the 2023 NFL draft, or 2024 NFL draft. But he's been added to the team now. And he's now playing at left tackle, where Dan Moore was kind of stuck at for the past couple of years, and he's getting a chance there, while Troy Fautanu goes to right tackle. And this is the vision that we had been talking about with these two tackles. Since they drafted Fautanu, was that, hey, now Broderick Jones can move to left, Troy Fautanu can go to right. But of course, last year Fautanu gets hurt early in the season. He's out for most of the year. Broderick Jones stays at right tackle. Dan Moore gets to stay at left tackle, and that kind of delayed the vision. But we at least saw in the first day of OTAs that delay at least should be gone from this season.
Yeah, and I think everyone is looking forward to it. I think Broderick Jones, when we asked him about it in 23 or 24, was always diplomatic and said, "Hey, listen, I'll play wherever the team needs me." I think that guy is a team player. I think he's got a great attitude, but in the end, Chris, you're most comfortable where you're most comfortable. And that guy played left tackle at Georgia. That's where he had his most success in college. I think he was there pretty much for his entire 3 seasons at the University of Georgia. So it's his natural position. I think everyone kind of wants to see how this works out. The thing is, I think everyone realizes, yes, Troy Fautanu is going to be a really good right tackle if he can stay healthy. Like with Broderick Jones, it's not if he can stay healthy, it's if he can improve his technique, if he can, handle everything that goes around being a franchise left tackle. Do you know the playbook? You're not pulling one way when the play's going another, like we saw in Baltimore. So I think there's more stuff going around Broderick Jones, like in terms of just the little details and him having to clean some stuff up. Where I think with Troy Fautanu on the right side, Chris, it's like, okay, as long as he can stay healthy, he's probably going to be in the Pro Bowl for us.
I think that could be really interesting for the Steelers. A comparison. I looked over the numbers for Broderick Jones in college and at the college level when he played left tackle at Georgia. He allowed a pressure every 37.3 snaps in his collegiate career. That's a very good rate to have. You know, a comparison. The top offensive tackle last year was Tristan Wirfs. He allowed a pressure in the NFL every 48.2 snaps, and that was the best rate. Like you know, if that's basically he allowed a pressure once a game. That's kind of what it was, right? You know, once maybe twice if the game went on pretty long. That's an elite rate there. So Broderick Jones at the college level did a 37.3. You know what the rate that he allowed in the pros in his first 2 years? 12.8 snaps. Every 12.8 snaps, he has a lot of pressure against the quarterback he's been protecting for the Steelers. That is an unacceptable rate for a guy that expects to be a starter, and that's what has to improve. Now, to your point, it could be a matter of he's more comfortable on the left side. We saw this with TJ Watt's rookie year when he first started off on one side, switched to the other, and then all of a sudden he felt more comfortable. He said, "Hey, this is the side I'm better with," and that's kind of where he stayed, and that's where he's become this All-Pro superstar for the Steelers. And I'm not saying Broderick Jones is about to turn into the TJ Watt of offensive tackles, but that could help his familiarity at the spot and help him feel at home, get his technique settled, and help him be more of that leader on the offensive line that they drafted him to be.
Yeah, and what you were talking about the pressures, even though he allowed some pressures as a rookie at right tackle, he didn't give up a ton of sacks. I mean,
Right.
he did give up a lot of sacks last season. He and Dan
Mhm.
Moore both, were I think up around double digits in sacks allowed, and that just can't happen when you have your two bookend tackles allowing as much pressure as they did. So this is a big season for Broderick Jones. Listen, Chris, if Broderick Jones doesn't put it together this year, and I'm not just talking about being average, like if they're not seeing potential franchise left tackle in him, I don't know that the odds are great that they're going to pick up that fifth-year option on his rookie contract. So
Right.
we're talking about him like being below average in 2024. He's got to do better than average, I think, in 2025. He's got to show signs that he's going to be a guy who could be a shutdown left tackle. So they commit that money to him. And so they know that first round pick, trading up to get him, was worth it. So to me, that's the one guy this year who has the most to prove. And I think the Steelers are watching and they're trying to figure out if they're going to want to commit big money to him in the future.
I think you're right. It's a big deal for him and his fellow draftees in 2023. Joey Porter Jr. in a big year to show who he is. Keanu Benton in a big year to show who he is. This is a year where the Steelers they need the first picks of the Omar Khan, regime when he started as GM to start turning into good players for the Steelers. And listen, each of them have had their own good contributions. Joey Porter Jr. has been a good corner on some days and not a good corner on some days. Broderick Jones has had his moments where he's destroyed people at offensive tackle, and there's times he's destroyed the Steelers himself. Keanu Benton has had moments where he's gotten, created key pressures or stuff to run. He's also had games like the Ravens playoff game where he got double teamed and blown out of the hole. They need those guys especially to step up, but especially Broderick Jones, who represented the first step towards fixing a lot of the things the Steelers want to fix, which includes that offensive line. You want to see him start to show that. And I personally, my opinion, Ray, just watching Broderick Jones, I thought he looked leaner when we saw than we've seen him before, at least in the first day of OTAs. I don't know if he's lost weight. We didn't get a chance to talk to him. He said he had to handle something else, and he'll talk to us today. That being Wednesday. So I look at that, but if Broderick Jones has come in and he is the player the Steelers need, that does so much for what the Steelers need to become, because we've talked about this team's needs to win the offensive line. They need to win the trenches. They need to, they need to block better in the run game. They need to protect the quarterback. If they can do those things, if they can win the trenches more often, they are several steps closer to being the team that they envision themselves being when they actually get turned back into Super Bowl contenders. But again, it starts with getting this line right, and that starts with Broderick Jones living up to the expectations that they traded up for him to get.
Yeah, and listen, these guys just reported to the Steelers back in April for phase one of the voluntary workouts. Now we're in phase two. But to your point, if he is leaner, that's a big part of being a pro, right? He's in his third year now. You learn how to take care of your body. You learn that, hey, maybe I don't have to carry this extra weight, or maybe, I'm going to get a little bit stronger and redistribute that weight, and I'll be better for it. So a lot of times we think of the improvement on the field in training camp, or during this phase in spring workouts, where really for young guys, especially, a lot of that improvement takes place in the off season after the season ends, getting your body right. And hopefully for Broderick Jones's sake, that's the case this year.
That certainly will be something that we keep an eye on. We'll see if we get to talk to them on Wednesday here at Steelers OTAs. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about the wide receiver position because Roman Wilson and Calvin Austin, we got a chance to talk to them a little bit. Brian Batko wrote about them, but we're going to give you our perspective on just how they looked when we got a chance to see them on the first day of OTAs. That's next here on the North Shore Drive podcast. But first, I remind you, the show is also brought to you by UFC Gym Pittsburgh. If you're looking for a new way to challenge your body and sharpen your mind, step into something more than just a workout. Welcome to the brand new Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy at UFC Gym. Here, it's not just about training, it's about living the values of honor, discipline, and respect. Whether you're a total beginner or leveling up your skills, you'll be guided through a structured program led by third-degree black belt instructors who build confidence, strength, flexibility, and real technique. Head down to the UFC Gym at the Waterfront or Market Square to learn about this exclusive 3-month introductory package today only at UFC Gym Pittsburgh. We're back here in the North Shore Drive podcast. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's talk about the wide receivers. It was the trade heard around the world when they traded away George Pickens after getting DK Metcalf, and now they're kind of back to where they were last year, granted with maybe a better wide receiver 1 in DK Metcalf over Pickens, but still wondering who can be that wide receiver 2. Will they trade for a guy? They've signed Robert Woods this year, stand-in Allen Robinson or Van Jefferson, but they have 2 young guys that they're looking to try, see if one of them can take a leap. Calvin Austin, of course, in his 4th year in the NFL, a guy that was drafted in the same year as George Pickens, and acknowledged, hey, I came in here with George, and acknowledging that he has a chance to kind of step up there. Roman Wilson, who they drafted last year, who never really played because of injuries, he gets the chance to compete as well. And right now, you have 2 smaller, faster, explosive wide receivers vying for that position there, and I think it's going to be interesting to see as OTAs continue, who starts to set like the pole position for where they will be when training camp starts.
Yeah, this is the time of year we talk about OTAs not being important for guys like DK Metcalf and TJ Watt and star players who have those, quote unquote max contracts. It's really important for guys like Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson who have a ton to prove. And I think more so even for Roman Wilson. I think in December, by after Thanksgiving last year, Chris, he was probably healthy enough to play. They just didn't think that he was ready to contribute because he lost so much practice time, right? It's hard, as Mike Tomlin used to say, or likes to say, to jump on that moving train. So, a rookie season that really did not go well for Roman Wilson. To me, like, that's the guy I want to watch this spring.
Yeah.
I want to see, okay, what does he look like? How does he move? Is he a future number 2? Like, can he be like the Steelers for years had a guy like Hines Ward, who was always that solid guy to go along with Plexico Burress or Santonio Holmes. Not an explosive receiver, but that guy you can count on to always be there and to maybe be your possession type of receiver. Can Roman Wilson be that? Or is he going to trend to being more of a depth guy or a number 3 or a number 4 receiver? So we don't know the answers to that yet, but I think these practices this spring and especially this training camp up in Latrobe, that'll tell the tale.
It will tell the tale. It'll get a chance to show, hey, yeah, this guy improves as a route runner. And, I got a chance when I asked him, hey, what did Zach Azzani want you to have? What does he have you working on? He talked about route indicators. He talked about staying low, going in and coming out of his breaks, doing a lot of those basic things. And I think that's what the Steelers need to see because, again, they didn't really get to see Roman Wilson. He practiced a little bit in training camp, got hurt, and then we never really got to see him again that much as far as the receiving side of things. And so, one thing he showed at Michigan was he showed the ability to get into his routes. And when he got the ball in his hands, he was pretty dangerous. He could break over the middle part of the field and catch the ball and get going and get separation from defenders there. Can he do that at the NFL level? That's going to be a big question there. And Calvin Austin, a guy who we did see take a step up last year in the role that he had with the Steelers, can he take another step forward? All those are going to be big factors around DK Metcalf, who, by the way, again, wasn't there himself. So those guys were probably the top two wide receivers we were looking at yesterday when it came to OTAs. But this is going to be an interesting dynamic for the Steelers wide receivers. And granted, this might not be the finished picture of who the Steelers wide receivers are in 2025, because we're talking about the Steelers maybe trading for a guy, maybe signing, a guy, because there's still some free agents that could be in consideration out there. But I think what could determine the Steelers' sense of urgency to do either of those things, whether it's trade or sign for a wide receiver, it could be to get the sense that they get from any of these guys in OTAs and minicamp heading into training camp. Because if Roman Wilson comes out and you get the sense that he's kind of still where he was last year, and Calvin Austin is still kind of Calvin Austin from last year, then the Steelers might say, you know what, we do got to sign somebody, because neither of these guys are ready to step into the wide receiver 2 role. But if both of them, or even just one of them, looks like they're ready to take a step forward, it might be a situation where, like, hey, neither of them are established wide receiver 2s yet, but they're both solid wide receiver 3s. Yeah. And if we can mix and match where they go and kind of move them around the field with DK Metcalf, and we have Pat Freiermuth and this offensive line's better, maybe that's enough for right now as far as developing the wide receiver position for the offense.
Yeah, maybe it's a situation of they look at Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson and they're like, I don't know. Maybe that's when you go out and you try to get like a Keenan Allen or a Gabe Davis, maybe a guy who could actually step in and be that number 2 and be a starter. But if they really show out this spring, maybe it's just another depth move. Like the one concern I do have, Chris, with Roman Wilson is the injury aspect of this. We see this on defense with Corey Trice. There's no doubt the Steelers like Corey Trice, but they can't really count on him. That's the reason they went out and signed Darius Slay, because Corey Trice hasn't been healthy enough to stay on the field to the point where they know they can count on him. So even if Roman Wilson goes out and plays great this spring, you do have that situation of looking back at last season, like, we think he can be good, but maybe we should have some insurance and back of him in case he does get injured again. Like with he and Calvin Austin, both those guys are slight. They're not the biggest guys. I think injuries always are going to be a concern with this too, as long as they're on the Steelers roster.
Certainly will be the case. We're going to be back at Steelers OTAs today. Be sure to look out for our articles and our post-practice reports that you see here on this very YouTube channel here from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. He's Ray Fittipaldo. I'm Chris Carter. Thanks again for tuning into the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We do the show every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and there's daily content from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. We're back here later today after OTA's practice number 2, giving you our insights as what we saw there. We'll see you here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.